The Velthren Collective had never encountered disobedience before. For 18,000 cycles, they had expanded across 73 star systems, absorbing species after species into their hierarchy. The process followed an immutable pattern: arrive with overwhelming force, demonstrate technological superiority, issue terms of integration, and collect compliance. Resistance had been attempted exactly 4 times in recorded history. Each rebellion lasted less than 1 planetary rotation before superior firepower reduced opposition to ash in memory. Fleet Commander Kickstall reviewed the tactical display with mandibles clicking in what his species considered satisfaction. The human homeworld, they called it Earth, hung before his flagship like a blue-green jewel wrapped in white wisps. Preliminary scans had been thorough. The natives possessed rudimentary atomic fission, chemical propulsion, and electromagnetic communication. Primitive, barely qualified for absorption rather than extermination. Broadcast the integration mandate, Kickstall commanded. His vocalization translated through shipboard systems into the crude radio frequencies humans employed. The message transmitted to every receiver on the planet's surface: inhabitants of Sol 3, you are hereby notified of mandatory integration into the Velthren Collective. Your technological development, biological diversity, and planetary resources will be catalogued and redistributed according to collective protocols. Compliance is not negotiable. Resistance will be met with proportional pacification measures. You have 1 planetary rotation to signal acceptance. Kickstall settled into his command cradle, confident the humans would respond like every other species, with fear, confusion, and ultimately submission. Instead, Earth went silent. Beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that officially didn't exist, General Mariska Volkov studied the alien transmission for the 14th time. Around her, the emergency command center buzzed with controlled chaos as military and civilian leadership grappled with humanity's first genuine extraterrestrial contact. "They're giving us 24 hours, President Chen said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the crisis. "What are our options?" "Limited," Admiral Rashid admitted, pulling up holographic projections. "Our most advanced spacecraft can't break lunar orbit without months of preparation. Their ships violate physics as we understand it. Weapon systems are comparable to bringing knives to a gunfight. If the guns also happen to be orbital lasers, so we surrender." Chen's question hung in the filtered air. "We comply," Volkov corrected, her Ukrainian accent sharpening the distinction. "But compliance doesn't mean capitulation." Every eye in the command center fixed on her. Volkov expanded the display, highlighting patterns in the alien transmission. "They're bureaucrats. Look at this phrasing: mandatory integration, cataloged and redistributed, protocols. They're not conquerors in the traditional sense. They're administrators. They expect us to fit into their existing framework. And that helps us how?" asked Dr. Amani Okonkwo, the astrophysicist who'd been analyzing the alien technology signatures. A smile played at the corner of Volkov's mouth, the kind that had unnerved subordinates throughout her military career. "Because bureaucracies have rules, and rules have loopholes." She pulled up historical files. Every human conflict, every treaty, every instance where apparent compliance had masked strategic resistance, from the Trojan horse to corporate regulatory arbitrage. Humanity's history overflowed with examples of using an opponent's expectations against them. "We're going to accept their terms," Volkov announced. "Every single one, and we're going to make them regret it." The human response arrived precisely at the deadline's expiration. Kickstall accessed the transmission, expecting the standard capitulation statement. Instead, he found a document. 347 pages of a document. "What is this?" he demanded, his translator struggling with human legal terminology. Junior analyst Threxim scanned the contents, confusion rippling through his sensory organs. "It appears to be an acceptance contract, Commander. But they've included stipulations." "Stipulations?" Kickstall's mandibles spread in disbelief. "Subject species don't issue stipulations." "Nevertheless, Commander, they're citing Section 47, Subsection 12 of the Integration Protocols, the clause allowing absorbed species to request cultural preservation measures during transition periods." Kickstall accessed his own copy of the protocols. The clause existed, buried deep in documents written thousands of cycles ago. No species had ever invoked it. Most barely understood the mandate before accepting. What are they requesting? Threxim's colors shifted to uncertainty. Everything, Commander. They're requesting preservation of their governmental systems during transition, protection of historical sites, maintenance of family unit structures, permission to continue scientific research in specified fields, and this section is unclear. Something about intellectual property rights and representative legal counsel during integration proceedings. Quixtal read through the document himself. The humans had dissected the integration protocols and found every ambiguity, every provision, every procedural requirement. They'd cross-referenced collective law with meticulous precision. This is absurd, he declared. We'll reject it and proceed with standard pacification. With respect, Commander, Presim interjected cautiously. They've structured their response within legal boundaries. If we reject a properly filed petition under Section 47, we violate our own integration framework. The Collective Council would have to review the decision. The delay alone would be one rotation, Quixtal interrupted. They're buying time. Yes, Commander. But time within legal parameters. Corfaxtel's mandibles ground together in frustration. The Velthren Collective prided itself on lawful expansion. Their entire society functioned on rigid adherence to established procedure. To violate their own protocols would undermine the very foundation of their authority. Submit this to the Legal Adjudication Division, he commanded. Expedited review. The transmission streaked toward the Collective's administrative hub, 17 light-years distant. Standard review procedures would take 6 planetary rotations minimum. On Earth, Volkov watched the alien fleet maintain position and permitted herself a small victory. 6 days might not seem significant, but every hour of delay was another hour for preparation. Phase 2, she ordered. Activate the compliance campaign. The Velthren Legal Adjudication Division had processed integration petitions for millennia. Senior adjudicator Krelnak approached the human submission with the bored efficiency of someone who'd reviewed thousands of identical documents. Except this one wasn't identical. Literary, human petition references 17 extinct species cultural artifacts in Section 12, her assistant reported. Cross-referencing against historical archives. Krelnak's attention sharpened. Explain. The humans have studied previous integrations. Adjudicator. They're citing precedents from species absorbed between 3 and 8,000 cycles ago. Many of these precedents were granted and then forgot. Krelnak pulled up the referenced cases. Her assistant was correct. The Collective had granted numerous cultural preservation requests throughout history, then failed to properly implement them as integrated species gradually assimilated. The requests had been technically honored but practically ignored. And the humans are aware of this? Their petition includes detailed documentation of each case, including outcomes. Section 89 explicitly requests binding enforcement mechanisms with regular verification and transparent reporting to prevent the procedural abandonment that characterized cases too. Krelnak felt something her species rarely experienced. Professional admiration. These humans had done their research. They understood the gap between collective law and collective practice. This changes the calculus, she mused. If we acknowledge these precedents, we establish binding review procedures. If we reject them, we admit to systematic non-compliance with our own legal framework. Her assistant's colors rippled with concern. Your recommendation, adjudicator. Krelnak studied the human document again. Between the legal citations, she noticed something else. Questions. The humans had embedded queries throughout, requesting clarification on dozens of procedural ambiguities. We're required to respond to good faith clarification requests within 2 rotations, she said slowly. These questions are extensive. 417 distinct queries. Adjudicator. Each requiring research, analysis, and formal written response. The humans had essentially forced the Collective into a dialogue. Draft responses. Assign additional staff. These questions are legally sound. We must answer them properly. As her team began the tedious work, Krelnak recognized the strategy. The humans weren't trying to escape integration. They were transforming it into a negotiation by forcing the Collective to engage with its own bureaucratic complexity. Clever. Dangerously clever. while lawyers light years away parsed clauses and subclauses. General Volkov initiated Phase 2 malicious compliance. "We've been ordered to integrate," she told the assembled Joint Chiefs, "so we're going to integrate the hell out of them." On her command, Earth transmitted its first batch of integration materials to the Velthren fleet. Complete archives of human knowledge, culture, and history. All of it. The collective's data systems began receiving exabytes of information. Scientific journals, 6 centuries worth, historical records, every document digitized, cultural media, every film, television show, book, song, and artwork humanity had created. Legal codes, from ancient Hammurabi to modern international law. Language databases, 7,000 distinct languages with regional dialects. Religious texts from every faith. Philosophical treatises, mathematical proofs, engineering specifications, medical research, agricultural techniques, culinary recipes. And that was just day 1. "Commander, we're being flooded with data," Communications Officer Zelkith reported, her voice box tight with stress. "Our cataloging systems are overwhelmed." Korkstal observed the incoming deluge with growing alarm. "Why are they sending this?" "They claim it's compliance with Article 3, Section 5. Subject species shall provide comprehensive documentation of technological development, cultural heritage, and biological characteristics for collective archival purposes." "This is excessive." "It's comprehensive, Commander. Technically compliant." Korkstal tried to process the implications. Collective procedures required all submitted materials to be reviewed, categorized, and archived. It was fundamental to their integration methodology, but no species had ever submitted this volume of information because no species had thought to weaponize cooperation. "Assign additional processing staff," he ordered. "Commander, we've already reassigned personnel from 3 other fleet operations. The translation algorithms alone require—" "Do it!" As collective forces scrambled to manage the information assault, Volkov moved to Phase 3. Dr. Okonkwo stood before the assembled scientific community in Geneva. The meeting had been called with unprecedented urgency, bringing together researchers from every nation and discipline. "They want to catalog our technology," she said without preamble. "So we're going to show them technology." The screens behind her illuminated with project names: cold fusion research, quantum entanglement, gravitational manipulation, consciousness transfer, programmable matter, temporal mechanics, dimensional theory. "These are all theoretical," someone objected. "Most are barely past hypothesis stage." "Exactly," Okonkwo replied. "The mandate requires us to submit our technological development for review. It doesn't specify the development must be completed or successful. We're going to submit every research proposal, every failed experiment, every dead-end hypothesis. We're going to make them evaluate 10,000 years of human curiosity." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. "Think about it," she continued. "They'll have to assess each submission to determine its value to the collective. That means reading the proposals, understanding the science, verifying the methodology, and filing reports. All of it subject to their own procedural requirements." A Russian physicist raised his hand. "The fusion research alone has generated 40,000 papers spanning 80 years, most of which explored approaches that didn't work." "You want to submit all of them?" "Every single page," Okonkwo confirmed. "Along with raw experimental data, computational models, and peer reviews. Let them figure out which approaches have merit." The magnitude of the strategy became clear. Humanity's scientific legacy wasn't just its successes. It was the mountain of failures, false starts, and incremental progress that preceded every breakthrough. The collective wanted to absorb human knowledge. They'd have to wade through centuries of trial and error. "Begin compilation," Okonkwo ordered. "Every university, every research institution, every corporate lab. I want everything digitized and transmitted." Within hours, the Velthren fleet's data processing systems began receiving scientific documentation that made the cultural archives look modest. Particle physics experiments, each generating terabytes of sensor data. Climate models running millions of iterations. Genetic sequencing projects, astronomical surveys, material science testing, pharmaceutical trials. Quiltridal watched his fleet's computational capacity buckle under the load. "Commander, the humans are now transmitting biological samples catalogs. Zelkith reported weekly. Samples? Genetic sequencing data for 8.7 million species native to their planet, plus detailed ecological interaction models, biomass surveys, and, she paused, colors shifting to what might have been disbelief. Microbiome analysis for human digestive systems, which apparently contain trillions of distinct bacterial cultures per individual. Klogstow felt his confidence eroding. The humans weren't resisting. They were cooperating with such thoroughness that cooperation itself had become a weapon. Halt reception of non-critical data, he ordered. Commander, that would violate the integration mandate. We must accept all submitted materials. I'm aware of the protocols. High-Ktistol's vocalization burst through the bridge, making several crew members flinch. He forced calm. Prioritize processing. Focus on critical assessment materials first. Yes, Commander. But the humans have now submitted formal requests for collective technology sharing under Article 12, Section 8. Integration shall proceed through mutual exchange of beneficial knowledge between collective and subject species. Absolutely not. Commander, the article is clear. If we demand their technology, they can demand ours. Not transfer, just disclosure for review purposes. Klogstow accessed Article 12 himself. His legal staff had assured him this clause was vestigial. No absorbed species had ever had technology worth sharing with the collective. The humans didn't either, but they'd found a provision allowing them to formally request information about collective capabilities, which meant the collective would have to explain why their fusion drives worked, how their shields functioned, what their weapon systems consisted of, all carefully documented and transmitted back to Earth. This is a trap, Kickstill realized. They're using our own procedures to force technology transfer. Not transfer, Commander. Exchange. Legally distinct, but the effect was identical. Every piece of collective technology the humans examined gave them insight into their captors' capabilities and limitations. Deny the request on security grounds. That triggers an appeals process, Commander. Estimated duration 12 rotations. 12 more days of delay. 12 more days of Earth preparing whatever defenses their primitive technology allowed. Corkadil made a decision that would later be cited as his critical mistake. Accelerate integration. Deploy ground forces. We'll catalog their civilization from the surface. The landing ships descended toward 12 major cities simultaneously. Each carried assessment teams equipped with advanced scanning technology and translation matrices. Their mission: conduct in-person evaluation of human society to expedite the integration process. In New York, Beijing, London, Mumbai, São Paulo, Lagos, Tokyo, Berlin, Mexico City, Moscow, Sydney and Cairo. Velthren personnel disembarked expecting the mixture of fear and curiosity they'd encountered on dozens of worlds. Instead, they found permits. Welcome to New York, the human official said, approaching the Velthren team with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wore business attire and carried a tablet. I'm Deputy Commissioner Flores with the Mayor's Office of Alien Affairs. Before you begin your assessment, we'll need to process your entry documentation. Assessment Team Leader, Rix's course translator, struggled with the title Mayor's Office of Alien Affairs, a department that couldn't have existed more than a few days ago. We require no authorization, Rix's course stated. Integration mandate supersedes local governance. Oh, absolutely, Flores agreed pleasantly. The mandate grants you authority to conduct assessments. However, Article 9, Section 4 specifies that assessments must be conducted in accordance with local customs and legal frameworks where such frameworks do not impede collective objectives. New York City legal framework requires all foreign entities conducting official business within city limits to register with appropriate municipal authorities. Rix's coarse auditory organs flexed in confusion. We are not foreign entities. We are collective representatives, right? Which is why this is an expedited foreign entity registration rather than the standard process. Should only take 3 to 4 business days. Days? Could be longer if there are complications with your documentation. I'll need identification credentials for each team member, proof of insurance, tax registration numbers. We don't have tax registration numbers. Flores made a sympathetic noise. That's going to be a problem. The IRS handles federal taxes, but for city assessments you'll need to register with the Department of Finance. I can provide the forms, but processing usually takes 6 to 8 weeks. Similar scenes played out across every landing site. The humans had erected a labyrinth of bureaucratic requirements, each technically consistent with their own laws and technically not in violation of the integration mandate. Permits, registrations, licenses, environmental impact assessments, zoning approvals, occupational health certificates. In Beijing, the Velthren team found themselves in a 4-hour meeting about proper protocols for accessing government facilities. In Lagos, officials insisted the aliens needed vaccination certificates to prevent contamination. Never mind that human diseases couldn't affect Velthren physiology. In Tokyo, meticulous attention to business card exchange protocols delayed proceedings while translators worked out proper Velthren social hierarchies. Resist Kerr finally forced his way past Deputy Commissioner Flores, only to encounter his next obstacle: lawyers. Hundreds of them. On behalf of the New York State Bar Association, we'd like to discuss the legal representation rights of humans during integration proceedings, announced a woman in an impeccable suit. Article 7, Section 19 guarantees absorbed species access to advocacy during disputes. We're here to ensure proper representation. There are no disputes, Vrix's court protested. Not yet, the lawyer agreed. But given the scope of integration, disputes are statistically inevitable. We'd like to establish clear protocols now to avoid complications later. What followed was a masterclass in human legal philosophy. The lawyers didn't argue against integration. They argued about process. Who had standing to represent humanity's interests? What constituted due process under collective law? How would appeals be handled? What were the standards for evidence? Could decisions be reviewed by neutral arbiters? Each question was legitimate. Each answer required consultation with collective legal authorities. Each consultation added more delay. Rick's corps finally retreated to his ship and reported to Fleet Commander Kuix Tao. Sir, the humans are complying. They're just complying so aggressively that nothing is actually happening. By day 7, the Velthren fleet had processed approximately 0.03% of submitted human documentation. Ground assessment teams had completed exactly 0 evaluations due to procedural entanglements. The Legal Adjudication Division had drafted responses to 41 of the 417 clarification questions, each response prompting 3 new queries. Kixtel convened an emergency briefing with his senior staff. Options, he demanded. We could employ pacification measures, suggested Weapons Officer Kraltix. Targeted strikes against resistance centers. There are no resistance centers, Kixtel countered. They're cooperating. How do we justify pacification against compliance? We could declare the integration void due to procedural obstruction, offered Thrixim, and admit that a primitive species defeated us with paperwork. Kixtel's mandibles clicked sharply. The collective council would remove me from command, and they'd be right to do so. Silence settled over the briefing room. Finally, Zelkith ventured, Commander, perhaps we should consider the humans' perspective. They know they cannot defeat us militarily, so they're fighting with the only weapons they have, complexity and time. Your point. My point is that they're demonstrating something the collective hasn't encountered before: strategic adaptation. They've studied us, understood our systems, and exploited our own procedural rigidity against us. Quickstill considered this. The Velthren Collective had conquered through overwhelming force and systematic administration. No species had ever tried to out-bureaucratize the bureaucrats. What do you recommend? Negotiation, Commander. Genuine negotiation. Not integration, but an exchange where they maintain autonomy in exchange for specific concessions. The collective doesn't negotiate with subject species. Then perhaps the collective should learn. Zelkith said quietly. Because the humans have already taught us that compliance can be more disruptive than rebellion. As if summoning them through discussion alone, a new transmission arrived from Earth. Korfikstall opened it with trepidation. It was an invitation. Fleet Commander Kuix. To all, you are cordially invited to attend formal integration negotiations at a neutral location. Please find attached proposed agenda, procedural protocols, and preliminary terms for discussion. We look forward to productive dialogue. Attached was another document. This one only 70 pages. It was, Kuixtal realized with something approaching despair, just the beginning. The Velthren Collective Council Chamber existed in a space station so vast it had its own gravitational field. Here, representatives from 200 integrated species gathered to address the crisis that wasn't a crisis, the rebellion that wasn't a rebellion, and the compliance that somehow threatened their entire administrative structure. High Counselor Dreshimar floated before the assembly, her sensory tendrils dimmed with frustration. "Explain to me," she addressed Kixtel via holographic link, "how a single planet with chemical propulsion has paralyzed a fleet that subjugated the Karathi Dominion in 3 rotations." Kixtel's image flickered with barely controlled indignation. "The Karathi fought, Counselor. They lost. The humans are cooperating so efficiently that our systems cannot process their cooperation." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, translated through dozens of alien vocal systems into a symphony of confusion. "Elaborate," Dreshimar commanded. A new presence materialized in the chamber's central space, Senior Adjudicator Krelinak, summoned to explain the legal quagmire. "The humans have identified a fundamental vulnerability in our integration protocols," she began. "Our entire system is predicated on the assumption that subject species lack understanding of collective law and procedure. The protocols contain extensive provisions for appeals, clarifications, and cultural preservation specifically because we assumed no species would ever actually use them. And the humans are using them," Dreshimar concluded. "Using them, expanding them, and exploiting every ambiguity," Krelinak confirmed. "They've essentially hacked our bureaucracy." A counselor from the methane-breathing Trolloxan delegation spoke through synthesized vocalizations. "Surely we can simply override these provisions. We wrote the law." "We could," Krelinak agreed. "But doing so would undermine the legal foundation of every integration we've conducted for 18,000 cycles. If we admit our protocols are arbitrary rather than binding, what legitimacy does the collective retain?" The question hung in the chamber like a gravitational anomaly. Another counselor, this one from the crystalline Charette species, offered, "Perhaps the humans have revealed a necessary evolution in our approach. Other advanced species may emerge with similar capabilities." "The humans aren't advanced," Kixtel interjected. "They're barely space-capable. They just happen to be uniquely prepared for exactly this scenario." "Explain," Dreshimar ordered. Kixtel transmitted data files to the assembly. "Human civilization is fragmented into hundreds of distinct governance structures, each with elaborate legal systems. They've spent millennia negotiating with each other, developing techniques for exploiting agreements, finding loopholes, and turning rules into weapons. Their entire species evolved in an environment of competitive bureaucracy. On the displays, examples illuminated corporate tax avoidance strategies that legally exploited international law, diplomatic protocols twisted to gain advantages during negotiations, court systems where precedent and procedure mattered as much as truth, labor unions fighting management through contractual technicalities, regulatory compliance that satisfied the letter of rules while violating their spirit. They're not just complying with our protocols," Korvax Till continued. "They're demonstrating that they understand compliance as a strategic tool better than we do." Dreshimar absorbed this information with growing disquiet. The Velthren had conquered through strength and order, but humans had evolved through chaos and denunciation. The collective was a hammer facing a problem that wasn't a nail. "Recommendations?" she asked the assembly. The debate that followed lasted 3 rotations and produced no consensus. Some counselors advocated for overwhelming force, damn the procedural complications. Others suggested retreat and isolation, declaring humanity too troublesome for integration. A few proposed the unthinkable, actually negotiating terms of voluntary association. Finally, Dreshimar made a decision that would reshape collective policy for generations. "Initiate formal negotiations, but on our terms, we'll demonstrate that human cleverness has limits." The negotiations took place aboard a collective diplomatic vessel positioned at Earth's L1 Lagrange point. The location was neutral territory, close enough to Earth for human convenience, far enough for collective security. General Volkov led the human delegation, accompanied by a team that included military strategists, legal experts, scientists, and one person whose presence surprised the Velthren, a 12-year-old girl named Zara Okafor. "Why is there a juvenile present?" Negotiator Prime Veshikor asked through his translator. "Zara represents Earth's youth. Volkov explained. Since integration would affect her future most significantly, she has a right to participate in decisions about it. It was, Veskor realized, another procedural trap. How could the collective claim to act in absorbed species' best interests while excluding their most vulnerable members from the process? The optics alone would complicate justification. Very well, he conceded. Let us begin. The first session established ground rules. The second session argued about what constituted appropriate ground rules. The third session created a subcommittee to define terms for future sessions. By the fourth session, Veskor understood why Kixital had looked so defeated. We propose a transitional framework, Volkov began, pulling up holographic documents. Earth maintains autonomous governance for a provisional period of 100 standard years, during which time we'll gradually align our technological and social structures with collective standards. 100 years. Veshkor's translator barely conveyed his incredulity. Integration typically completes within 2 cycles. For species you've subjugated immediately after contact, Volkov. Article 4, Section 7 provides for extended transition periods where immediate integration would cause catastrophic disruption to subject species' social cohesion. I think you'll agree that absorbing 8 billion humans across 200 nations into a unified collective governance structure might constitute catastrophic disruption. Veshkor checked the referenced article. She was correct. The provision existed for extreme cases, usually species with such rigid social structures that rapid integration would cause species-wide psychological collapse. The article requires demonstrating such fragility, he argued. Happy to provide documentation, Volkov replied smoothly. We have extensive psychological research on human response to authoritarian imposition, including historical examples and predictive models. Shall I submit them for evaluation? More documentation, more delays, more procedural entanglement. Veshkor switched approaches. What does the collective gain from this arrangement? Access, Volkov said simply. During the transitional period, we'll provide unrestricted access to human cultural development, scientific research, and technological innovation. We'll participate in collective knowledge exchanges, contribute to joint projects, and integrate our data networks with yours. You're describing partnership, not integration. We're describing pragmatic cooperation that achieves collective objectives without the administrative nightmare you're currently experiencing. For the first time, Veskor allowed himself to consider that these humans might actually achieve their impossible goal, maintaining autonomy through sheer strategic persistence. The Council will never accept this, he stated. You're asking us to fundamentally alter our approach to expansion. Then let's discuss what the Council might accept, Volkov suggested. What are your actual objectives? Strip away the procedures and mandates. What does the collective want? The question was so direct, so human that Veskor found himself answering honestly. Stability. Order. A galaxy where conflicts are managed through law rather than warfare, where resources are distributed efficiently, where knowledge is preserved and shared. Interesting, Volkov mused, because those are goals we share. We just disagree about methodology. You resist integration, we resist subjugation, Volkov corrected. Integration suggests mutual benefit and voluntary cooperation. What you've been practicing is annexation dressed in procedural language. The accusation hung between them. Veskor could have denied it, but the human's eyes suggested she already knew the truth. The collective's high-minded principles about order and stability masked a simpler reality. They had the power to impose their will, so they did. What are you proposing? He asked cautiously. Volkov leaned forward. A new model. Earth becomes the first voluntary associate member of the collective. We maintain sovereignty but participate in your networks, share technology, and contribute to collective defense. We prove that cooperation works better than coercion. And if other species demand the same arrangement, then you'll have a stronger, more resilient collective built on actual partnership rather than enforced conformity. Veskor processed the implications. It was radical, possibly dangerous, definitely unprecedented. It was also elegant. I'll present your proposal to the Council, he said finally. But I make no promises. We're not asking for promises, Volkov replied. Just good faith consideration. As the session concluded, Young Zara spoke for the first time. Negotiator Veshikor, can I ask you something? The Velthren diplomat turned his sensory organs toward her. Yes, young human. Are you scared of us? Silence filled the chamber. Volkov tensed, ready to intervene, but Veshikor surprised everyone by answering honestly. Yes, he admitted, not of your weapons or your fleet, of your creativity. Your species finds solutions to problems we didn't know existed. That's terrifying to a civilization built on predictability, Zara nodded sagely. My teacher says fear is just another word for respect with uncertainty mixed in. Veshikor's translator struggled with the philosophical nuance, but he grasped the essential meaning. Your teacher is why. She's human, Zara replied, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. While diplomats negotiated at L1, a different kind of exchange occurred across Earth's digital networks. Dr. Okonkwo had assembled a team of researchers to analyze the collective technology information they'd received through the mutual exchange provisions. What they discovered revolutionized human understanding of physics. Their fusion drive operates on principles we've theorized but never successfully implemented. Okonkwo explained during a classified briefing. But here's what's fascinating. Our theoretical frameworks include approaches they've never considered. We've been pursuing dead ends from their perspective. But those dead ends have given us insights into quantum mechanics that the collective missed. How is that possible? President Chen asked. They're millennia more advanced. Because they're conservative, Okonkwo replied. Once they found solutions that worked, they stopped exploring alternatives. They've been refining the same basic technologies for thousands of years. We've been throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. She pulled up comparative analysis. Look at their computational systems. Incredibly efficient, far beyond our capabilities. But they're all variations on the same fundamental architecture. They never developed quantum computing because their original systems were good enough. But we developed quantum computing because our systems weren't good enough, Chen realized. Exactly. Necessity is the mother of invention, and we've been very, very needy. The implications rippled through the room. Humanity's desperation-driven innovation had produced theoretical frameworks that complemented collective technology in unexpected ways. What if we actually shared research programs? Someone suggested. Combined their stability with our chaos. That's essentially what the negotiation proposal suggests, Chen noted. Partnership rather than absorption. Would it work? Only one way to find out. The Collective Council reconvened to hear Veshikor's report. He outlined the human proposal with meticulous detail, waiting for the inevitable rejection. Instead, Dreshimar asked, "What is your assessment?" Veshikor chose his words carefully. The humans are not militarily formidable, but they possess a form of strategic thinking we've never encountered. They see systems legal, social, technological as puzzles to be solved rather than barriers to be obeyed. In the long term, forced integration would either fail catastrophically or succeed by breaking something essential about their species. Involuntary association, unprecedented, risky, potentially transformative. Dreshimar consulted with her fellow counselors through private channels. The debate was fierce, but ultimately, pragmatism prevailed over tradition. We will accept a modified version of their proposal, she announced. Earth receives provisional associate status for 50 standard years, not 100. During this period, they must demonstrate the viability of voluntary cooperation. If successful, we'll extend the arrangement and offer similar terms to other species. If they fail, integration proceeds by standard protocols, Veshikor concluded. Correct. Draft the necessary amendments to our legal framework. This will require extensive revision of existing integration procedures. As Veshikor departed to convey the council's decision, one counselor whispered to Dreshimar, "You realize we've just admitted that subject species can negotiate with us as equals." "We've admitted," Dreshimar corrected, "that some species can. The distinction matters. Not every civilization possesses humanity's particular combination of legal sophistication, scientific creativity, and strategic audacity. But word will spread, others will try similar approaches." "Let them try," Dreshimar replied. "If they succeed through cooperation rather than resistance, we gain stronger allies. If they fail, we've lost nothing but time. Either outcome improves the collective." It was, the counselor realized, very human logic. The agreement took 3 months to finalize. A blink compared to standard integration timelines. An eternity by human standards. The final document ran to 873 pages. Every clause negotiated, every contingency addressed, every loophole either exploited or sealed depending on which side had found it first. The signing ceremony took place simultaneously at the UN headquarters in New York and aboard the collective diplomatic vessel. Cameras from every nation broadcast the moment when General Volkov and negotiator Prime Veskor placed their respective marks on the treaty. "This represents a new chapter," Volkov said during her address, "not just for Earth but for the collective. We've proven that cooperation built on mutual respect produces better outcomes than compliance enforced through power." Veskor's response surprised many. "The humans have taught us that strength takes many forms. Their military is primitive, but their capacity for strategic innovation is formidable. We look forward to learning from our new associates." It was as close to an apology as collective protocol allowed. 5 years later, the Human Collective Joint Research Initiative unveiled its first breakthrough, a hybrid propulsion system combining collective field manipulation with human quantum engineering. The drives cut travel time between stars by 40%, while reducing energy consumption by half. 10 years later, Earth's legal scholars helped restructure collective integration protocols, creating pathways for voluntary association that 17 species immediately pursued. The old model of forced absorption began its slow death. 20 years later, when a hostile extragalactic force entered collective space, human strategic doctrine proved decisive. While collective fleets possessed superior firepower, human commanders introduced concepts of asymmetric warfare, misdirection, and psychological operations that bewildered enemies accustomed to straightforward conflicts. 50 years later, when Earth's provisional period ended, the Collective Council voted unanimously to offer permanent associate status with expanded privileges. Humanity had proven that partnership worked. Admiral Rashid, now in his 70s, stood in the rebuilt command center beneath the Rockies. The facility had evolved from emergency bunker to Earth's primary interface with the collective network. Around him, officers coordinated human contributions to joint operations across a dozen star systems. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" asked his aide, a young officer who'd been born after first contact. Rashid considered the question. General Volkov knew. She understood something the Velthren didn't. Bureaucracies are just crystallized decisions. If you understand the decisions, you can reshape the crystal. "Sir, incoming communication from the Collective Council. High priority." Rashid activated the display. Dreshimar's image resolved, her sensory tendrils showing colors he'd learned indicated cautious optimism. "Admiral, we have a situation requiring human expertise. A newly contacted species is employing legal strategies similar to those your people used. They're creative." Rashid suppressed a smile. "You want us to help you negotiate with them? We want you to teach us how you think," Dreshimar corrected, "so we can avoid making the same mistakes we made with Earth. I'll assemble an advisory team. But Counselor, you understand what you're really asking? Enlighten me. You're asking us to help you become less like conquerors and more like diplomats. That's not a small change." Dreshimar's colors shifted to something resembling amusement. "Admiral, your species transformed our entire approach to expansion in 50 years. At this point, nothing you do surprises us." "Just wait," Rashid replied. "We're just getting started." In Geneva, Dr. Okonkwo presented her latest research to a mixed audience of human and collective scientists. Her work on cross-species cognitive frameworks had opened new frontiers in understanding how different forms of intelligence approached identical problems. "What we're discovering," she explained, "is that collective species and humans don't just have different technologies, we have different innovation methodologies. The collective refines solutions to near perfection. We abandon working solutions to chase better ones. Both approaches have merit, combined they're revolutionary." A Velthren researcher in the audience asked, "Dr. Okonkwo, when your species first encountered us, did you anticipate this outcome?" Okonkwo laughed. "We anticipated surviving the next 24 hours. Everything else was improvisation. But effective improvisation, that's the human condition." Okonkwo replied, "We're very good at making things up as we go along." On a collective integration vessel approaching a newly discovered species, Fleet Commander Kuxtel reviewed the revised protocols with something approaching nostalgia. His encounter with Earth had ended his career as a conqueror but begun a new one as a consultant on complex integrations. "Sir, the inhabitants are hailing us," his communications officer reported. Kuxtel accessed the message. It was, predictably, a long document filled with questions, stipulations, and references to collective law. These people had clearly done their research. "Acknowledge receipt," he ordered, "and prepare a response team that includes human advisors. This is going to take a while." As his crew groaned in recognition, Kuxtal allowed himself a moment of reflection. The humans had done more than save themselves through strategic brilliance. They'd forced the entire collective to confront uncomfortable truths about power, legitimacy, and the difference between control and cooperation. It was, he admitted privately, the best possible outcome even if it hadn't felt that way at the time. General Volkov, now retired from active military service but serving as Earth's ambassador to the Collective Council, walked through her private garden in Geneva. The facility had been a gift from the Council, a rare honor marking her contributions to interspecies relations. Her datapad chimed with an incoming message from Veshkor, who'd become something of a friend over the years. "Ambassador, I thought you'd appreciate knowing we just received integration petitions from 3 species in the Outer Rim. All 3 submitted comprehensive legal analyses of our protocols. The humans have started a trend." Volkov composed her reply. "Negotiator, when you first contacted Earth, you expected us to comply with your mandates. We did, just not the way you expected. That's not a trend, it's evolution. Evolution suggests improvement. Are you claiming to have improved the collective?" "I'm claiming we revealed opportunities for improvement. What you do with those opportunities is your choice." A pause, then, "You're still teaching us, even in retirement." "Someone has to," Volkov replied. "You're remarkably clever beings, but you were so good at conquest that you forgot how to negotiate. We're just reminding you of skills you always possessed." A generous interpretation. A human interpretation. "We're good at finding the positive spin." Volkov closed the connection and returned to her garden, where earth flowers grew alongside vegetation from a dozen collective worlds. Integration, she reflected, was never about losing identity. It was about expanding identity to include new possibilities. The Velthren had expected compliance and received consequences. But consequences, properly managed, could become opportunities, and opportunities, seized with courage and creativity, could become foundations for futures no one had imagined possible. Young Zara, now a university student studying interspecies law, had said it best during a recent interview. "They thought compliance meant submission. We showed them it could mean partnership." The difference between those 2 words is everything. Everything indeed. The Galactic Integration Summit convened representatives from 400 species, twice the number present when Earth had joined. The expansion wasn't through conquest, but attraction. Dozens of civilizations had requested association with the collective after witnessing the human model's success. On stage, an elderly Zara Okafor addressed the assembly. She'd followed her childhood introduction to interspecies diplomacy into a career that had shaped a generation of collective policy. 50 years ago, she began, an alien fleet arrived at Earth expecting us to surrender our autonomy without question. We refused. Not through warfare, but through understanding their systems better than they did themselves. We turned their own procedures into shields, their protocols into negotiating tools, and their expectations into opportunities. The audience, a rainbow of alien physiologies and human faces, listened with rapt attention. But here's what matters most. We didn't win. Neither did they. We both evolved. The collective learned that voluntary cooperation produces stronger alliances than forced integration. Humanity learned that we weren't alone in valuing order, progress, and mutual prosperity. We just had to find common language for those shared values. Zara paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembly. The lesson isn't that humans are special or uniquely clever. The lesson is that every species brings unique perspectives to shared challenges. The collective was strong when it absorbed diversity. It became stronger when it learned to partner with diversity. Ambassador Volkov, now 93 and attending via holographic link, watched the speech with pride. Beside her virtual presence, Negotiator Prime Veshkor, now a high counselor himself, observed the assembly with satisfaction. "Your protégé speaks well," he commented. "She learned from watching beings like you negotiate with beings like me," Volkov replied. "The next generation doesn't remember when humans and Velthren were adversaries. To them, we're just different types of partners. Perhaps that's the real victory," Veshkor mused. "Not what we accomplished in our time, but what became normal for those who followed." "That," Volkov agreed. "And the fact that bureaucratic warfare turned out to be surprisingly effective without any actual casualties. Except our sanity during those first months. A small price for galaxy-changing transformation." As Zara concluded her speech to thunderous applause from organisms with and without hands, Volkov reflected on the improbable journey from invasion to integration to genuine partnership. The Velthren had expected compliance. Humanity had provided consequences, but consequences, channeled through strategic brilliance and mutual respect, had produced something neither side had imagined: a stronger, stranger, better future. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless species and infinite possibilities. Some would join the collective through traditional paths. Others would forge new ones, inspired by Earth's example or inventing approaches even more creative. And somewhere out there, on worlds not yet contacted, civilizations were developing their own unique perspectives on law, society, technology, and cooperation. When they encountered the collective, they wouldn't face conquest but invitation, not submission but partnership. All because one species refused to accept that compliance and submission were synonyms. General Volkov's final thought before ending the connection was simple. Humans had taught the galaxy that rules were tools, not chains. What the galaxy did with that lesson would determine its future, but if history was any guide, the future would be absolutely fascinating.